That's not what it says. Charles Eastbourne flinched, his hand halting mid-signature. The gold-plated fountain pen trembled slightly in his fingers, just inches above the dotted line that would seal a billion-dollar deal. His eyes darted toward the unexpected voice, confusion creasing his brow. The words were quiet, almost fragile, yet they cracked through the polished tension of the penthouse like a sudden gust of cold air through a sealed room. Heads turned not because of volume, but because of dissonance. That voice didn't belong in this boardroom of billionaires, where power was inked on thick paper and whispered in marble halls. It had come from a child, a little black girl. She stood near the drink cart, fingers curled tightly around a faded picture book, her pink sneakers slightly too big, the left one with its sole peeling off. Her name was Maya Williams. She was 6 years old, and she had just interrupted a billion-dollar deal. What no one in the room knew not yet was that Maya hadn't just blurted those words out of childish curiosity. She had heard them talking. An hour earlier, Maya had wandered into the corner hallway just outside the main boardroom, while her mother, Camille, was helping set up for the afternoon reception. Maya had sat cross-legged by the frosted glass, flipping through her book and humming under her breath. That's when she heard them two men's voices, quiet but distinct, speaking in Hindi. They assumed no one else could understand. Certainly not a little girl with frayed shoelaces and a picture book. Sheikh Sharma will never know, one of the voices said, casual, confident. We keep the Hindi version loose. No one reads both sides, especially not the old man. What if his team checks? They won't. And even if they do, the clause is buried. 5% market loss triggers full asset transfer. But it's phrased as a regulatory line. Legal camouflage. We've done this before. Maya's head tilted. She didn't blink. She just listened. Her grandfather had always spoken Hindi at home, a language of bedtime stories and Sunday afternoon parables. He had taught her to love its rhythm, its music, its secrets. That day, she understood every word the men thought were hidden behind syllables no one else in the room could hear. And now, standing inside the penthouse boardroom, Maya's wide brown eyes were locked on the binder lying open on the table. Without hesitation, she broke into a run. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished marble floor as she rushed toward the long table, her little finger outstretched to point directly at the Hindi contract page. There, that part right there, she cried, trying to reach the section she had overheard being manipulated. But before she could touch the paper, one of Mr. Sharma's senior legal advisors, a man in a sharp gray Nehru suit, stepped in front of her. Get her away from the table, he snapped, eyes narrowing. A second man, one of Eastbourne's aides, moved beside him. This is not a place for children, he said coldly. She shouldn't even be in the room. Joanna Eastbourne rose from her seat and barked across the table. Security. Now. Get that girl and the maid out of here. Camille gasped, rushing to her daughter's side, scooping her up just as the tension in the room spiked. Maya, baby, don't, please don't. She's right. Maya's voice broke through her mother's panic, still firm despite the rising storm. The paper in Hindi doesn't say the same thing as the English one. The room fell back into silence, this time heavier. Mr. Sharma turned fully to face her, expression unreadable. You speak Hindi? He asked, his tone suddenly gentler. Maya nodded. My grandpa taught me. I heard them talking, before the meeting. They thought no one understood. Charles Eastbourne stiffened. What exactly did you hear? Mr. Sharma asked, his voice almost a whisper now. Maya looked at him, then at the contract. They said you wouldn't notice. That the Hindi version says if your company loses 5% market share, all your assets go to Eastbourne Capital. It's not in the English one. I checked. Charles's face darkened. It's legal language, condensed, perfectly standard. Camille looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow them both. Maya, she whispered, please. I read it 3 times to make sure, Maya said softly, and I remembered what they said in the hallway. Mr. Sharma's interpreter cleared his throat. There may have been some nuances lost in translation, but I'd like to see the original document, Mr. Sharma interrupted, his voice like stone. Charles shifted in his seat. Let's be rational. You're not going to derail a billion-dollar contract over a child's misunderstanding. I'd like to verify it myself, Sharma repeated more firmly. Maya took a step back, her courage now trembling beneath the weight of attention. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Grandpa always said if you know something's wrong and you say nothing, then you're part of the lie. Silence again. Mr. Sharma's face softened. What was your grandfather's name? Walter Harris. No. A flicker crossed Sharma's expression, something unspoken, like memory. Walter Harris, he murmured. More to himself than anyone. He served in the Indian campaign, helped save a regiment of our soldiers in '64. That would make you. Camille stood, her hand resting on Maya's shoulder. We'll go, she said quickly. I'm sorry, she didn't mean. You will not leave, Mr. Sharma said, his voice calm but commanding. Joanna scoffed. You're not seriously. I am, Sharma cut in, steel returning to his tone. I believe I owe a debt. To her grandfather, and to her. Charles slammed the contract closed. This is ridiculous. A child's bedtime book versus an international legal team? Truth doesn't care who says it, Mr. Sharma said. Then he turned to Maya. Thank you for speaking up, Maya. Her lips parted slightly. It was the first time anyone in a room like this had spoken her name like it mattered. Camille bent low, wrapping her arms tightly around her daughter. You did good, baby. You did real good. Outside, the city of New York stood tall in twilight, its towers of ambition and power casting long shadows. But inside that room, for the first time in a long time, someone had turned on the light, and it came from the smallest voice among them. The silence after Maya's words lingered, stretching taut across the room like a wire ready to snap. Camille's arms tightened protectively around her daughter. Maya, still small in the folds of her mother's embrace, stared wide-eyed at the grown-ups now locked in a silent war of looks, contracts, and consequences. Mr. Ravi Sharma finally broke the quiet, his voice low but firm. I want the full contract, every version, every page, in both languages. An assistant quickly nodded and scrambled from the room. Charles Eastbourne stood up, jaw clenched, adjusting his tailored cufflinks, as if to reassert control. This is becoming a farce, he muttered. You're letting a child derail 6 months of negotiation? Sharma's gaze was unwavering. I'm letting the truth intervene. Charles gave a dry chuckle. Come now, Ravi. Don't act like you haven't buried clauses before. This is business. Not a moral seminar. But it became a moral seminar, Sharma replied quietly. The moment you chose to lie in a language you assumed no one would understand. Maya shifted in Camille's arms and spoke up again, voice small but clear. You said he wouldn't notice. You said the clause was camouflaged. Her eyes locked on Charles. Camille winced. Maya, it's all right, Sharma said, holding up a hand. Let her speak. Charles rolled his eyes and walked to the windows, overlooking Central Park. This is ridiculous. No, Sharma said. This is justice. Just delayed. He turned toward Maya again. You said your grandfather taught you Hindi? Maya nodded. He told me words are like windows. If you learn enough of them, you can see what other people try to hide. That landed like a quiet gavel in the room. Joanna Eastbourne, arms crossed and lips pursed, muttered something under her breath, but Sharma ignored her. Camille finally stepped forward, gently placing Maya down. We should go, she said, softly but clearly this time. You've been patient enough. I didn't mean for her to be in the room. She belongs here, Sharma said. She changed everything. Charles turned, voice sharp. If we're done celebrating the housekeeper's daughter, maybe we can get back to actual business. Sharma didn't flinch. You should be grateful someone told the truth before you stepped off a cliff. You were seconds from committing fraud and dragging both our companies into a public scandal. Charles narrowed his eyes. I had protections, legal layers, NDAs. She'd never be able to prove it. Is that what this is for you? Sharma said. A game of who can cover up better? Another aide returned with the original documents. 2 thick binders thudded onto the table. Sharma opened the Hindi copy first and turned to the page Maya had referenced. His brow furrowed. He looked up slowly. She's right, he said, and handed the page to his interpreter. The man paled. This clause, it's not just a discrepancy, it's predatory. The room stirred with a tension that now bordered on collapse. Even Joanna Eastbourne stepped back. Camille instinctively reached for Maya's hand. "We really should leave," she whispered. "Please wait," Sharma said gently. "Camille, is it?" "Yes, sir. I want to speak with you privately after this. Both of you." Camille's brows pulled together. "May I ask why?" "Because I believe your daughter just saved a company. And perhaps a few souls in this room." Joanna scoffed again. "Let me guess. You want to make her the new CFO?" Sharma ignored her. Charles, growing red, tried one last attempt to pivot. "We can renegotiate the terms, adjust the language. This doesn't need to become public." "No, it doesn't," Sharma said, "but I want a new legal team, and your name off the contract." "You're not serious." "I am. You see, Mr. Eastbourne, I don't do business with people who bet on ignorance." Charles exhaled through his nose, nostrils flaring, but said nothing more. Sharma turned to the head of his legal counsel. "We're done here for today. Cancel the rest of the meetings." The staff quickly moved into motion. People stood, papers were gathered, coffee went cold. As the tension cleared, Maya tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. "Did I do something bad?" Camille kneeled and kissed her on the forehead. "No, baby. You did something brave." Sharma walked over slowly and crouched to Maya's level. "Your grandfather was a good man. I served with him. His letters, they got me through a hard time." His voice cracked, just slightly. "He'd be proud of you." Maya looked down shyly. "He always told me, if the room gets too loud with lies, be the whisper of truth." Sharma smiled, a rare softness breaking through his hardened exterior. "He was wiser than most men I've met." "No." Camille's phone buzzed in her pocket. A reminder for her second job that evening. She silenced it. Something had shifted. Something bigger than missed hours and subway delays. As Sharma stood, he addressed Charles one last time. "I suggest you reflect on how easily your empire almost crumbled at the voice of a 6-year-old. Charles said nothing. Outside, the first lights of evening blinked to life across Manhattan. Cabs honked below. The towers stretched upward like monuments to ambition, but somewhere within the gleam and glass, a little girl had pierced the sky with truth. Maya clutched her book tighter, and as she and her mother left the room quietly, humbly, everyone inside somehow knew they just witnessed the end of one story, and the beginning of another. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, sealing away the tension of the boardroom like a vault holding a secret too large for the world. Camille exhaled for the first time in minutes, her grip still firm around Maya's small hand. Her heart was pounding, but Maya stood beside her with quiet steadiness, staring ahead at the metal doors like she had just walked away from a playground, not a corporate war zone. "You shouldn't have run toward that table, Maya," Camille said softly, her voice trembling, not with anger, but with the weight of what could have gone wrong. "You scared me." "I know," Maya whispered. "But they were lying. They were going to trick Mr. Sharma." Camille crouched, brushing a stray braid away from her daughter's forehead. "And you were right to speak up, but sometimes, speaking up is dangerous." Maya nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than a child her age should. The elevator chimed as it passed the 30th floor. The cityscape behind the glass walls glimmered in twilight. Manhattan's skeleton of steel and ambition lighting up against the dusk. Camille glanced sideways at her daughter, then down at her own shoes, cheap soles worn thin from cleaning other people's homes. She had scrubbed those boardroom floors, polished the glass, washed the dishes of the very people who had moments ago tried to silence her child. She had kept her head down for years, and in 5 minutes, Maya had lifted it higher than Camille ever dared. "You were listening earlier, weren't you?" Camille finally asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the descending elevator. Maya gave a little nod. "I wasn't spying, Mama. They were just talking. Like I didn't matter." Camille pulled her close. "To them, maybe, but not to me. Not ever." When the elevator touched the ground floor, the lobby was quiet, too quiet. Security stood near the revolving doors, hands folded, eyes shifting in their direction. Camille stiffened. She'd seen those kinds of looks before, uncertain, judging, as if trying to measure if someone still belonged in the building. Before she could decide whether to keep walking or take a detour, a voice called out from behind them. "Mrs. Williams, Maya." They turned. Mr. Sharma, now without his entourage, approached with a calm but purposeful stride. His long coat swung slightly at his sides, and the fine lines at the corners of his eyes looked deeper now, wearier but not without warmth. "I was hoping to catch you before you left," he said. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Camille nodded cautiously. "Let's walk," he said, gesturing toward the corridor leading to a quieter private lounge. Inside, away from the eyes of the lobby, the silence was less judgmental, just thoughtful. Mr. Sharma lowered himself into one of the leather chairs and motioned for Camille to sit across from him. Maya climbed into the seat beside her mother, her feet swinging far above the floor. "I've made a lot of deals in my life," he began slowly. "Bought companies, sold them, outsmarted men twice my age, and been outsmarted by kids half my experience. But today, something different happened." Camille said nothing. "I saw something I hadn't seen in decades. Unfiltered truth. From a child, no less." Maya looked down, clutching her picture book. Sharma smiled. "Do you know why I learned English, Maya?" She glanced at him and shook her head. "My father used to tell me, if you want to survive, speak what they speak. But if you want to lead, understand what they hide." He leaned forward slightly. "You did both today, and you reminded me of something I forgot. That power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's small and soft-spoken, and standing behind a drink cart with a book in her hands." Camille felt her throat tighten. "I don't want this to be the end of our story," Sharma continued. "I want it to be the beginning." "Of?" Camille hesitated. "What do you mean?" "I want to offer you a position not as a cleaner," he said gently, "but as part of our new community outreach initiative. You'll be helping build trust with immigrant families, especially women. Real voices, real needs. We need someone who understands what it means to be unheard." Camille's eyes widened. "Mr. Sharma, I'm flattered, but I don't have a degree. I don't. You have what matters: heart, wisdom, and integrity. The rest we can teach." "Oh," he turned to Maya. "And as for you, young lady, I've spoken to a friend of mine who runs a private language academy. You'll be starting classes next week. Hindi, Spanish, even Mandarin if you want." Maya lit up. "Really?" "Really, but only if your mom agrees." Camille was too stunned to answer. For years, she had told herself stories to survive, that the world was what it was, that justice wasn't always just, and that her job was to stay invisible enough to feed her daughter and get through the day. But now, in a single afternoon, the rules had changed. Or maybe they'd always been waiting to be rewritten. "I don't know what to say," Camille murmured. "Say you'll think about it," Sharma said, "and say you'll teach your daughter never to stop being brave." Maya tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. "Can I say something?" Sharma smiled. "Of course." Maya sat up straighter. When they were talking in the hallway, they laughed, like it was a joke, that no one would notice. She paused. "I think the world needs better jokes." Sharma chuckled, a deep, genuine sound. "You may be right." They stood, and Maya reached out, shaking Sharma's hand with all the seriousness of a child who understood the weight of truth. Outside, the wind had picked up, sweeping through the city streets, rattling signs, and tugging at coats. It didn't howl, but it carried something. A whisper, one that had started in a boardroom far above, and was now finding its way across the world. 2 days later, Camille sat at the small dining table in their apartment in Harlem, an untouched cup of chamomile tea cooling beside her. The sounds of the neighborhood hummed through the open window, a distant siren, kids playing stickball in the alley, someone blasting old jazz from a corner stereo. Maya was asleep in the next room, her tiny frame curled under a fleece blanket dotted with stars. Camille's phone buzzed on the table, a message from an unknown number. "They know she heard everything. Be careful." Camille stared at it, her stomach tightening. It didn't say who sent it, but she didn't need to guess. Was Ravi Sharma, the man who had offered her a lifeline just days before. She reached instinctively for the curtain, drawing it closed, heart skipping. Was she being paranoid? Or was she finally seeing the world as it was ruthless, calculated, and afraid of little girls with sharp memories? Her laptop was still open. A dozen tabs lining the top of the browser. Non-disclosure agreements. Regulatory documents. Archived versions of the Hindi and English contracts. She didn't understand half the legal jargon, but one thing was clear. The original file metadata for the Hindi contract had been tampered with. She had stumbled upon it purely by accident. When she had opened the PDF and clicked Properties, she noticed 2 creation dates. One from 3 weeks ago. One from a month prior. That shouldn't have been possible. Someone had rewritten history. She clicked through a folder she hadn't meant to find. Hidden deep in a corporate Google Drive was a subfolder marked Archive, Backup. Inside, scanned handwritten notes from legal counsel, tracked changes in the contract, and an email with the subject line. Final edits, Conceal Clause, V3, to Hindi only. Camille's breath caught. They hadn't just missed the translation. They had engineered it. She saved everything to a secure USB and unplugged the laptop, heart pounding. Her hands trembled, but she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for Maya. Her baby girl had walked into a room of wolves and told the truth. And wolves didn't forgive. The next morning, she took Maya to school and lingered longer than usual, watching from the sidewalk as her daughter disappeared through the tall glass doors. The security guard, a tired man with kind eyes, nodded at her with familiarity, and she forced herself to smile. As she turned away, a black SUV she didn't recognize was idling across the street. Tinted windows, no license plate in the front. Camille took a breath and walked on. Later that afternoon, at a private corner table inside a Brooklyn cafe, Camille sat across from Sharma, clutching her purse close to her chest. The USB was hidden inside. "I found something," she said quietly, placing her phone face down on the table. "I wasn't looking for it, but I found it." Sharma sipped his tea without blinking. "Tell me." Camille handed him a folded piece of paper. A printed email from Eastbourne's internal team, confirming intentional manipulation of the Hindi document. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was the bullet. "They were going to cheat you," she said. And when Maya stopped it, I think they saw her as a loose thread. Something to be cut. Sharma's face remained unreadable. "That's why the SUV was at your block. So I'm not crazy." "No," he said, just suddenly visible. Camille hesitated. "I don't want her dragged into this. She's 6. She's already in it." Sharma replied. "They made sure of that the moment they saw her as a threat. But I have resources. Security. Legal teams. If you want protection, it's yours." Camille leaned back. "I want the truth. Not just for us, but for everyone they've done this to. How many families have been ruined by fine print no one could read?" Sharma nodded slowly. "I've begun building a case, but it's bigger than Charles. There are shell companies, subsidiaries, entire floors of Eastbourne Capital built on contracts like this. So burn it down." His eyes flicked toward her with something that looked like admiration. "You say that like you've done it before." "No," Camille said, "but I've cleaned up the messes of men like him my whole life." He cracked the barest smile. "Then let's make this one count." "No." That evening, back at home, Camille pulled Maya into her lap as they sat by the window, looking out at the city below. Lights blinked like stars caught in steel. "Mama?" Maya asked. "Did I do something wrong again?" "No, baby," Camille whispered, kissing her forehead. "You did something right. And sometimes, when you do that, the world tries to scare you. But we won't let it." Maya leaned against her. "Are we safe?" "For now," Camille answered honestly. "But we're not alone." Doubly, 3 blocks away, on a rooftop across from their building, a man with a long lens camera clicked quietly in the shadows. Inside Eastbourne Tower, Charles stood in his office, eyes locked on a monitor displaying a paused frame. Camille holding Maya, arms wrapped around each other. His jaw tightened. "She kept a copy," said his assistant behind him. Charles didn't turn. "Then we find it." "What about Sharma?" Charles finally turned, his face cold as granite. "We'll handle Sharma. But first, we cut the route." Outside, A storm was building over the East River, and in an apartment warmed by a child's bravery, a mother sharpened her resolve. Because sometimes, when a lie grows too big, only the truth whispered by a child can bring it all down. The subway car jolted as it roared through the tunnel beneath Manhattan. Camille clutched her canvas tote closer to her chest, the USB drive hidden in the inner pocket, wrapped inside an old receipt. Her eyes scanned the faces in the car, ordinary commuters, students, a woman humming to herself while knitting. But Camille had begun to see the world in layers now. Behind every ordinary glance, she wondered, who was watching? She had just come from Sharma's downtown office. The documents had been duplicated, cross-verified by 3 independent legal translators. There was no longer any doubt. The Hindi contract had been altered maliciously, with surgical precision. Sharma's legal team was building a case that could bring down not just Eastbourne Capital, but a network of corporations complicit in decades of exploitation. Camille's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. Another message. This one read, "Tell no one else. Trust is a luxury. You have eyes on you. R." Camille slipped the phone back in and stared at the window, though there was nothing to see but her own reflection vibrating in the dark tunnel glass. She looked older now. Not tired, exactly, but sharpened. Trimmed down to the parts that mattered. The protector, the fighter, the mother. When she arrived back in Harlem, the sky was beginning to turn that shade of gray that meant rain was considering a visit. She walked the 5 blocks home with purpose, ducking into her building just as the first drops began to fall. Inside, the hallway smelled like pine sol and old radiator heat. Home. She opened the door and was immediately met by Maya's voice. "Mama, look. I finished the puzzle Grandpa gave me." Camille smiled, her heart lightening. "Let me see." On the living room floor, Maya had pieced together a 500-piece landscape puzzle of the Indian Himalayas. She beamed with pride, her small hands pointing to the snowcaps. Camille knelt beside her, running a hand through her daughter's braids. "You're getting stronger every day," she said. "So are you," Maya replied softly. Camille blinked, taken aback by the words. 6 years old, and already reading her like a book. That night, Camille sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and the lights low. She didn't want to wait anymore. There had to be more victims. Other families. Other small voices silenced behind translation barriers and forged trust. She searched through corporate case settlements, whistleblower filings, obscure court dockets. Then she found it. A case in 2016. Filed in Queens. A Filipino janitor at a shipping subsidiary of Eastbourne Capital had tried to report discrepancies in his overtime and pension agreement. He claimed the translated copy of his contract in Tagalog didn't match the English version. The case was dismissed for lack of compelling evidence. No lawyer had taken it seriously. Camille's fingers flew across the keys. Another case in 2019. A Chinese warehouse employee in Jersey City. Same pattern. Dismissed. She leaned back, staring at the growing list. Dozens. Maybe more. The pattern was there, invisible to most, but not to her, not now. She reached for her phone and dialed the number Sharma had given her. "Camille," he answered, voice warm but alert, even at 10:40, 2 p.m. "I think this is bigger than your company," she said. "I think Eastbourne's been doing this for years, across languages, cultures, immigrants. They rely on people not understanding the fine print." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "We need to widen the net." "I want to help," Camille said. "I don't have a law degree, but I know how to find things. I know how to talk to people like me." "Then let's begin." The next week was a whirlwind. By day, Camille resumed her cleaning shifts on paper. She was still working for a subcontracted firm. But in truth, she was listening, collecting, connecting dots. She slipped business cards to cafeteria workers. She sat beside laundry staff during breaks and asked quiet questions. Did anything ever seem off? Did contracts ever come in a language you didn't fully understand? Most didn't want to talk. Fear was thicker than coffee in those break rooms. But some did. One Dominican woman at a garment warehouse showed Camille a clause she'd always suspected was wrong. Another from Nigeria had signed an English-only contract despite requesting a Yoruba translation. Camille recorded it all: testimonies, documents, hidden clauses. She called it the Whisper Network. Sharma's legal team grew. So did their strategy. The goal was no longer just to expose a single doctored contract. It was to reveal a system that had institutionalized deceit, wrapped in legal complexity and linguistic manipulation. One evening, Camille came home to find Maya drawing at the table. She had sketched a woman in a red cape standing in front of a tower made of paper. On top of the tower was a crown with dollar signs, and below it, the woman held up a magnifying glass. Beside her stood a little girl, pointing. "Is that us?" Camille asked. Maya nodded. "You're the hero. I'm the helper." Camille smiled, though her eyes welled. "You're more than the helper, baby. You're the reason it started it all." Maya tilted her head. "Will they get in trouble? The bad people?" "Yes," Camille said, "but it's going to take time." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, in that simple, devastating way only children can ask, she whispered, "Will they try to hurt you?" Camille paused, then knelt beside her. "Maybe, but I'm not alone. We've got people helping us. Mr. Sharma, his lawyers, even others we haven't met yet. And you know what else?" Maya shook her head. "We have the truth. And it may not shout, but it echoes. And the right people will hear it." No. Across the city, in a sleek office now stripped of its nameplates, Charles Eastbourne watched a news broadcast from behind his desk. Allegations are mounting against Eastbourne Capital and several of its subsidiaries following claims that translated contracts were intentionally altered to manipulate vulnerable employees. He muted the television. "Who leaked it?" he asked. His assistant didn't answer. "Find out," Charles growled, "and if it's Sharma, make him bleed in court." "Matt." He stood, staring out over the city. But what he didn't know was this. The truth he had buried in language, in loopholes, and in silence was no longer buried. It had a name, a mother, a daughter, and a whisper that was growing louder every day. The cold came early that morning, brisk winds sweeping through the Harlem streets, rattling store awnings and whispering warnings through the alleys. Camille zipped Maya's jacket up to her chin and kissed her forehead before sending her off to school. The security guard at the gate gave Camille a quiet nod, already knowing to keep a watchful eye. Back upstairs, Camille poured herself a lukewarm cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the latest updates from Sharma's team. More testimonies were coming in. Transcripts, whistleblower statements, and blurry photos of contracts scrawled with confusing amendments. Dozens of them, from across the country. She was helping connect dots that law firms had missed for years. The USB drive, now one of 4 copies, was no longer hidden. It sat on the kitchen counter in a sealed envelope, ready to be delivered to the lead investigative journalist Sharma had brought on board. A woman named Nora Tran, Pulitzer nominee, quiet, relentless. Camille was scheduled to meet her at 2 p.m. At 10:37 a.m., someone knocked on the apartment door. Camille froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. She padded quietly to the peephole. A man in a delivery uniform stood outside, holding a clipboard. Nothing suspicious, except for the fact that she hadn't ordered anything. "Miss Williams?" he called. "Package for you." She opened the door, chain still fastened. "Who's it from?" The man looked up. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't say, but it's urgent." Camille's instincts screamed, "Leave it at the door." He hesitated, then set a medium-sized brown box on the floor. "Sign here?" "No thank you," she said and shut the door. She watched through the peephole. The man didn't leave. He stood still for a second too long, then turned and walked not toward the elevator but down the hallway, past the cameras, toward the emergency stairwell. Camille waited until he was gone, then opened the door again. She stared at the box. Something about it felt wrong. She didn't touch it. Instead, she grabbed her phone and called Sharma. He picked up immediately. "Camille? Someone just came to my door. Fake delivery. I didn't open the box. He didn't leave through the lobby." "I'm sending someone right now," Sharma said. "Don't touch anything. Don't leave your apartment." Camille hung up and backed away from the door. By noon, 2 security professionals hired by Sharma arrived. One swept the hallway. The other carefully opened the box. Inside, shredded paper, a toy recorder, and taped to the bottom a single typed note. "Your daughter speaks well. Let's keep it that way." Camille felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't clever, it was a message. A threat dressed like a prank. "This means we're close," said one of the guards. "They're scared. Scared people get sloppy." Sharma arrived minutes later, unusually disheveled. He took one look at the box's contents and swore under his breath. "This changes things," he said. "I'm putting round-the-clock protection on you and Maya. No debate." Kemi didn't argue. By 2 p.m., she was in a secured location in Midtown, meeting with Nora Tran. The journalist was younger than Camille expected, with dark, tired eyes and a laptop always within arm's reach. "You've done more groundwork than most legal teams I've worked with," Nora said after reviewing Camille's files. "You've mapped a pattern of multilingual deception that spans continents." "It started with Maya," Camille replied. "I just followed what she heard." Nora nodded. "We're planning a full series. Audio interviews, documents, leaked memos. It's not just about contracts anymore. It's about how corporations use language as a weapon." Camille leaned forward. "Then let's name the weapon." Nora smiled. "We will." Later that night, Camille tucked Maya into bed and sat by her side longer than usual. The nightlight cast soft shadows on the wall, and Maya held her stuffed dog close to her chest. "Mama," she whispered, "what happens if they get really mad?" "They're already mad," Camille said softly. "But we're not hiding. We're telling the truth, and the truth doesn't get tired." Maya blinked slowly, processing the answer. "Even if they yell? Even if they scream," Camille said, "because the truth, it echoes louder." She kissed her daughter goodnight and stepped out of the room. Her phone buzzed. A text from Nora. "Your testimony goes live tomorrow. We've verified everything. Eastbourne's legal team is panicking." Camille stared at the message, then at the city lights outside her window. They didn't look so distant now. Across town, inside Eastbourne's legal office, Charles Eastbourne sat surrounded by half a dozen attorneys. Pages were scattered across the table. Contracts. Internal emails. A leaked memo dated 2 years prior clearly marked, "Do not translate Clause 13b accurately in regional copies. Exposure risk negligible." He picked up the paper and ripped it in half. "I want everything buried. Anyone talking fired. Investigate Sharma's team. Pull their phone records." One lawyer spoke up cautiously. "Sir, it's too late. They're going public. The whistleblowers. The families. The press has the files." Charles stood, red-faced. "Then we attack. Personally. Financially. Whatever it takes." But even as he barked orders, the cracks were forming beneath his feet. Wall Street analysts were whispering. Investors were jittery. Shareholders wanted answers. And somewhere above it all, a voice was preparing to speak. Quiet, strong, unshakable. The voice of a mother who had once cleaned floors. The voice of a daughter who had listened carefully. And together, they were about to turn a whisper into a roar. The morning the story went live, Camille awoke to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. She blinked sleep from her eyes as the soft amber light of dawn crept through the apartment window. Maya was still asleep, curled up like a cat at the edge of her bed. Camille reached for her phone and saw a string of missed calls, texts, and email notifications. The headline glowed on her screen like a torch in the dark. "The language of deception. Inside Eastbourne Capital's $1 billion exploitation of immigrant workers." Underneath it, a picture of Camille, not from any interview, but one captured by Nora Tran. Camille holding Maya's hand, walking across the street under a cloudy sky. Her head held high. Camille sat in stunned silence for a long moment, her heart pounding. This was it. No more whispers. No more hidden folders or silent stares. Their story was out in the world, and the world was already listening. Sharma called just after 7 a.m. "We're trending," he said without preamble. "Nora's story is being picked up by 3 national outlets. The legal community is already digging into precedent. My inbox is flooded with former employees, lawyers, even translators who've been pressured to keep quiet. This is bigger than we thought." Camille barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen as a video loaded an audio clip. Maya's small voice, clear and strong, saying in Hindi, "That's not what it says." It was the moment everything had begun. Sharma's voice lowered. "Camille, you need to know. Charles Eastbourne's lawyers are preparing an emergency injunction. They're trying to suppress further releases. They're scared, Camille said. They're furious. But this time, we have the light. By 9 a.m., Camille was receiving calls from advocacy groups, university professors, union leaders, and talk show hosts. Everyone wanted to speak to her. To Maya, to anyone who had dared stand up against a Goliath and speak in a voice they never expected to matter. A soft knock came at the door. Camille peeked through the peephole, half expecting another stranger in disguise, but it was Nora. Camille opened the door, and the journalist stepped inside with her laptop under one arm and a pressed smile that couldn't quite mask the adrenaline behind it. "You all right?" she asked. Camilla nodded. "We're okay, for now." Nora set her laptop on the kitchen table and opened a folder. "There's something you need to see," she said, pulling out printed screenshots of anonymous tips submitted after the article went live. One in particular stood out, a whistleblower from within Eastbourne's translation department. The note was simple. Charles ordered intentional language distortion in at least 6 languages. They call it linguistic shielding. Internal nickname, The Curtain. I have documents. I'm ready to talk. Camille stared at the words, then looked up at Nora. So it wasn't just Hindi. Not even close. This is systemic, institutionalized, and they used language as a weapon. Duh. Camille took a long breath. Then we're not finished. Outside, across the city, the impact rippled outward. Charles Eastbourne was pacing the marble floors of his office, his phone glued to his ear. "What do you mean the injunction failed?" he barked. "They had no right to release internal data." He stopped short, listening to the response. His face paled. The SEC had launched a preliminary inquiry. The Department of Labor was reviewing Eastbourne's contract procedures, and the National Association of Translators had just issued a public statement condemning the deliberate distortion of legal meaning across vulnerable language groups. Everything was unraveling. "This is an ambush," he hissed. "Someone planted this from the inside." His assistant stepped into the office quietly. "Sir, there's a protest forming outside, and the board has called an emergency session. You've been asked to join via secure line." "No." Charles stared out the window at the building across the street. He could already see them gathering. People with signs, bullhorns, and cameras. Employees, advocates, citizens. They weren't loud yet, but they would be. Meanwhile, Camille sat across from Maya at the dining table, both of them still in pajamas. Maya was coloring again this time, a drawing of a courtroom. In the center stood a tiny girl holding a piece of paper. Around her were tall figures, all looking down at her, except one kneeling, listening. "What's that one?" Camille asked, pointing. "That's you," Maya said. "You were listening, so I wasn't alone." Camille felt something shift inside her, an anchor lifting. Nora closed her laptop and stood. "You'll be asked to testify soon. Maybe even before Congress if this becomes a federal case." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're the human face of it all," Nora said. "You and Maya." Camille glanced at her daughter. "She's too young for this." "She already changed the world," Nora replied gently. "But yes, you'll be her shield from now on. Let her be a kid again." Camille nodded slowly. Later that afternoon, Sharma met Camille in a private conference room of a legal aid foundation, now working with his team to represent hundreds of new clients. He looked older, prouder, but there was still tension in his jaw. "There's one more thing," he said. "We found out where the curtain strategy started. It wasn't Eastbourne." Camille frowned. "What do you mean?" "This began in a consulting firm 12 years ago. Eastbourne was one of many clients. It was designed to reduce liability by mistranslation. They called it plausible miscommunication." "Jesus," Camille whispered. "We're chasing the roots now, but this isn't just a tree. It's a forest." Camille stood and looked out the window. "Then we'll burn the whole forest down." Sharma smiled. "You don't back down easily, do you?" "I was quiet for years," she said. "That was enough." That night, after dinner and bath time and bedtime stories, Maya fell asleep to the soft rhythm of city noise outside their window. Camille sat on the fire escape with a cup of tea, watching the skyline. She knew this wasn't over. There would be trials, delays, pushback. But for the first time in her life, the silence didn't scare her. It had broken, and now it belonged to her. Camille stood behind the double doors of the courthouse, her palms slightly damp, the sleeves of her gray blazer pressed smooth but clinging from nervous heat. Outside, the murmur of reporters, activists, and legal observers buzzed like a swarm of bees. She had passed them coming in microphones jostling, voices shouting her name, and the sharp sting of flashbulbs illuminating Maya's face as she clutched Camille's hand. Now, Maya was safe inside a private room with Sharma's assistant and a social worker, coloring quietly. Camille had kissed the top of her head before stepping into the hallway, whispering, "Be brave, like always." And Maya had nodded solemnly, handing her a small origami heart. In her other hand, Camille now clutched that folded heart like it was a shield. Inside the courtroom, the air was crisp with tension. The federal hearing had been expedited after growing national pressure. Lawmakers, union leaders, and even former Eastbourne executives were now testifying about the company's long-standing translation practices. Legal analysts called it one of the largest corporate ethical scandals in recent memory. Camille was next. The door opened. A bailiff nodded. She stepped through. Cameras clicked. People turned. And for a moment, the world felt impossibly still. She took her seat at the witness table. The lead counsel adjusted his microphone and smiled gently. "Williams, thank you for being here." Camille nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you for asking me. What is your current occupation?" He began. "I'm a domestic worker," she said. "I've cleaned floors, bathrooms, kitchens in corporate buildings for over 12 years. And how did you become involved in this case?" Camille paused. "Because my daughter overheard a lie, one that was never meant to be understood." She went on to explain in clear, measured detail how Maya had noticed the discrepancy in the Hindi contract, how Camille herself had verified the differences, how they had traced that lie through a tangle of corporate files, altered translations, and a system built on selective understanding. "What impact did this discovery have on your life?" the counsel asked. Camille looked around the courtroom. "It changed everything. We were threatened, watched. I had people sent to my door pretending to deliver packages. They thought we'd be too scared to speak. But what they didn't understand is we'd spent years being silent. And once we stopped, we weren't going back." A quiet murmur rose in the chamber. The judge tapped his gavel gently. The counsel continued. "You've seen the phrase linguistic shielding in the documents leaked to our committee. What do those words mean to you?" Camilla didn't hesitate. "It means we thought they wouldn't understand, so we could get away with it. It means erasing someone's rights by assuming they don't have the words to fight back." Silence fell across the room. Later, during cross-examination, Charles Eastbourne's defense team tried to paint her as emotional, unstable, overly involved. "Miss Williams," one sharply dressed attorney asked, "do you have formal legal training?" "No," she replied. "Have you ever worked in translation or contract law?" "Number. Then how can you be sure of what you claim?" Camille leaned forward slightly. "Because I listened, and because I was lied to just like hundreds of others. You don't need a law degree to know when someone's taking advantage of people who can't speak the language they're signing in." Another rustle swept through the courtroom. After Camille's testimony concluded, Sharma met her in the hallway, his face drawn but proud. "You held your ground." "Me." "She held mine first," Camille replied, thinking of Maya. As they walked out of the courthouse, they were swarmed again. But this time, Camille didn't look away. She stood tall, letting the cameras capture the face of a woman who had once been invisible and was now the symbol of something much larger than herself. In the days that followed, the fallout at Eastbourne Capital grew. The board suspended Charles Eastbourne pending internal review. Multiple translation vendors were subpoenaed. Federal regulatory committees launched broader investigations into contract practices across dozens of corporations. What had once been a whisper had become a reckoning. Camille and Maya moved temporarily into protected housing arranged by the legal team. It was modest but quiet safe. Maya missed her school, but Camille promised they would return once it was safe. And at night, when the world grew quiet, Camille read her daughter books about explorers, truth-tellers, and revolutionaries. Maya always smiled at the end and said, "That's us, right?" Camille would kiss her cheek. Yes, baby. That's us. One afternoon, Camille received a letter in the mail, handwritten, stamped with no return address. Inside was a note. I translated documents for Eastbourne in 2018. They asked me to omit key clauses. I have proof. I didn't know what to do until I read your story. Thank you. I'm ready now. It was signed simply, L.S. Camille folded the letter and placed it in a small box beside other letters, drawings, and printed articles, her growing archive of truth. These were no longer whispers. They were voices finding each other in the dark. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Camille and Maya walked to a small playground nearby. It was quiet. Just a few children, a few parents. Camille sat on a bench while Maya climbed the jungle gym. A woman approached mid-50 seconds, gray streak in her hair, eyes kind. "You're Camille, aren't you?" she asked gently. Camille tensed slightly, but nodded. "Yes." The woman sat down. "My daughter works as a nurse. Immigrant. English isn't her first language. She signed a contract 2 years ago, and she didn't know what half of it meant." Camille waited. "She sent me your article," the woman continued. She said, "Now I know I wasn't stupid. They just made sure I couldn't understand." Her voice cracked. "Thank you, Bud." Camille smiled, tears burning behind her eyes. "We're just telling the truth." The woman nodded and stood. "Sometimes, that's the bravest thing anyone can do." As the sky turned violet, Maya ran toward her, cheeks flushed, laughing. Camille opened her arms and caught her in a hug that felt like home. The fight wasn't over. Trials were coming, more walls to break down. But for the first time, Camille believed something deeply. The truth didn't just survive, it multiplied. And no matter how carefully it had once been buried, it always found its voice again. Autumn arrived in the city with a quiet grace trees shifting into warm reds and golds, wind carrying the scent of roasted peanuts and fallen leaves, and daylight drifting away just a little earlier each evening. For Camille, it was the first season in a long time that didn't feel like waiting for something to collapse. Instead, it felt like standing inside something that had finally, stubbornly, held. Eastbourne Capital had officially been indicted. Charles Eastbourne faced criminal charges, fraud, coercion, and willful manipulation of legal language to exploit vulnerable laborers. But the case wasn't just about him anymore. It had grown into a wider class action suit that now included hundreds of plaintiffs across the country, many of whom had come forward after Camille's testimony. Translators from across industries spoke up, confessing the subtle pressures they'd endured to adjust tone or simplify language in ways that always seemed to favor the employer. The term linguistic shielding had entered public discourse. It appeared in op-eds, protest signs, congressional hearings. What had once been an invisible barrier was now a spotlighted tactic, and it was being dismantled, piece by piece. Camille, for her part, hadn't returned to cleaning offices. She hadn't had time. She was now part of a national working group on ethical labor contracts, advising on a new federal framework for multilingual transparency in employment. She didn't wear suits or carry a law degree, but she brought with her the one thing many in that room didn't have: lived experience. And every time she spoke, they listened. At first, she'd been hesitant. She didn't want to become a symbol. But Maya had said something one night, while brushing her teeth, that stayed with her. "Mama, when you speak, it makes other people brave too." That was all she needed to hear. Now, Camille's days were spent in rooms she never imagined she'd be allowed to enter. Rooms filled with lawmakers, human rights attorneys, activists, and immigrant workers who had once believed their stories were too small to matter. And at the center of it all was Camille, equal parts mother, fighter, and bridge. On a quiet Thursday morning in November, Camille and Maya returned to the original office building where it had all started. The place where Maya had first overheard the lie. The building now stood half empty, with Eastbourne's name scrubbed from the entrance plaque. It was just a building now. 4 walls and glass and elevators that still made that soft ding. "Do you remember this?" Camille asked as they stood in the lobby. Maya, now 7, nodded. "The room with the long table, and the men who talked funny." Camille smiled. "They weren't expecting you to understand. They were wrong." They walked past security, who recognized them and smiled, and made their way to the 24th floor, now leased to a non-profit legal center helping low-wage workers with contract literacy. Camille had helped launch the initiative just a month ago, funded by a settlement clause Eastbourne's lawyers had fought hard to suppress. In the conference room, a mural had been painted along the far wall, a woman kneeling beside a child who was pointing toward a tangled, burning paper trail. Around them stood others, workers, mothers, janitors, translators, all looking forward. The words above read, "Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be heard." Maya walked up to the mural and touched her likeness on the wall. "I look taller," she said. "You are taller," Camille whispered. Afterward, they sat at the little cafe across the street, 2 hot chocolates, extra marshmallows. Camille let herself breathe. For the first time in a long time, there were no urgent calls, no court hearings, no reporters waiting. Just a table, a window, and her daughter. "Mama," Maya said after a sip, "do you think they'll ever do it again? Lie like that?" Camille considered the question. "Some will," she said honestly. "There will always be people who think power is about silence. But now more people know how to listen, how to ask the right questions, how to read the fine print. And people like us, people who once thought we didn't belong in the room, will be the ones holding the doors open." Maya nodded, thoughtful. A man at the next table, older, salt and pepper hair, reading the newspaper, looked over. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you Camille Williams?" Camille's spine straightened slightly. "Yes." He smiled. "My wife and I, we work with refugee families. Your story, it changed how we explain everything now. Contracts, medical forms, school documents. We teach them to ask, to translate, to not trust blindly. You gave us permission to speak up." Camille blinked, the words sitting heavy and bright in her chest. "Thank you," she said. When the man left, he nodded to Maya, who gave a small wave in return. They stayed until the cups were empty and the marshmallows were gone. Later that night, as Camille tucked Maya into bed, Maya whispered, "Are we done now, with all the scary parts?" Camille smiled and pulled the blanket higher. "I think the worst is behind us. But even if something scary comes again, we know how to face it. Together." Maya nodded sleepily, eyes already fluttering closed. "Night, Mama." Camille sat by the window for a long time after, watching the city hum beneath her. Somewhere out there, more stories were waiting to be told. More people wondering if their voices mattered. More mothers gripping contracts they couldn't read. More daughters picking up the pieces of silence and asking, why? She didn't know where those stories would come from, but she knew they'd come. Because the echo didn't end with her, it only began. And every lie that once hid behind a different language now had one thing to fear. A little girl who once pointed her finger at the truth and said, "That's not what it says." And a mother who dared to believe her. It was spring again. The kind of spring that made even the sidewalk cracks bloom tiny bursts of green, fighting their way through years of concrete and wear. Camille stood at the podium in the grand hall of the National Labor Ethics Conference, her hands steady, her breath deep and even. She'd spoken at events before, community panels, press interviews, committee hearings, but this was different. This time, the room wasn't filled with lawyers or journalists. It was filled with janitors, line cooks, home health aides, immigrants who worked night shifts, mothers who'd signed forms they couldn't read, fathers who'd taken jobs they didn't fully understand because there was no other way to feed their families. This was a room full of people who didn't usually get invited to anything that started with a stage and ended with applause. But today, they weren't the audience. They were the reason. Camille adjusted the mic. "My name is Camille Williams. I used to clean the floors of buildings like this one, polished brass elevators, wiped fingerprints from boardroom windows. I never thought I'd stand at the front of a room like this. But I'm not here because of what I cleaned. I'm here because of what I heard and what I refused to unhear." The crowd listened in a silence so deep it felt sacred. "My daughter Maya overheard a lie," Camille continued. "It was said in Hindi, in a room full of men who thought no one would understand. They were wrong. She understood. And from that moment on, so did I." The murmurs rippled gently, nods, a few quiet exhales. Camille told the story again, not for the media, not for the courtroom, but for them, for the people who'd lived it in other ways. She spoke of mistranslated contracts, whispered threats, corporate gaslighting. She spoke of fear, and then she spoke of fire. How many of us, she asked, were told we were lucky just to be allowed inside, told to keep our heads down, our mouths shut, told to sign, even if we didn't know what we were signing? Hands went up, not as questions, but as silent yeses. Today we raise our heads. The applause didn't roar. It didn't need to. It moved like a wave, slow, rising, unstoppable. After the speech, Camille stepped off stage and was greeted by a small line of people waiting not for autographs, not for photos, but to say thank you. Each of them had a story. A moment, a silence they were ready to break. A woman with silver braids said, "My grandson translated my hospital paperwork last year. He's 9. 9. That's not how it should be." A man with a worn baseball cap said, "My union started printing contracts in Spanish last month because of your case. We're finally reading what we've been told for decades." Another woman simply hugged Camille and whispered, "I didn't know I was allowed to ask questions." Camille listened to each one, nodding, never rushing. They were no longer alone, and neither was she. Later that evening, Camille returned home to find Maya sitting on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by books and construction paper. She was working on a school project, something about heroes of history. Who'd you choose?" Camille asked, kicking off her shoes. Maya looked up, grinning. "You." Camilla blinked. "Me? Yeah, I mean, everyone else picked presidents and astronauts. But I picked you. 'Cause you did something real." Camille knelt down beside her. "Baby, presidents and astronauts do real things too." Maya tilted her head. "But they didn't save people from being tricked." Camille laughed softly, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "Well, I guess when you put it that way." Maya handed her a drawing stick, figures, a courtroom, a mother holding a microphone. Above it, in big purple letters, it read, "My mom told the truth louder than the lie." Camille placed the drawing on the fridge, right next to Maya's alphabet magnets, and the photo of them on the courthouse steps. That night, she sat on the balcony, the city breathing beneath her. Lights flickered like stars that had fallen into buildings. The wind smelled like new beginnings. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Nora Tran. "Heads up. A school in Detroit just launched the Maya protocol. All student forms translated into 5 languages now. Named it after your daughter. Thought you should know." Camille let out a long breath, the kind that carried weight and wonder all at once. Later, she sat down with her journal. The same one she had started when all of this began. Most of it was filled now. Pages of names, memories, fears, tiny victories. On the final page, she wrote, "We thought our voices were small. They weren't. They were seeds. And now, they're growing in places we'll never see, but they're growing just the same." Camille closed the journal and stood by Maya's door, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, legs tangled in the blanket. One arm flung dramatically over a stuffed bear. The world had tried to shrink this child's voice into a whisper. It had failed. And tomorrow, Camille knew, there would be more rooms, more meetings, more policy boards and school districts and quiet revolutions blooming in the corners of cities that used to forget people like her. But tonight there was only this. A full heart. A child safe. A voice remembered. In a world that had once counted her out, Camille Williams had done more than rise. She had spoken, and because of her, silence no longer ruled the room.